In the beginning of the 2016 NFL season, San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick began taking a knee during the national anthem played prior to the start of each game. Responding to a series of police shootings that had recently occurred to African American men, Kaepernick stated that he wanted to bring awareness and public attention to this issue that had been buried in the American psyche for far too long. In a 2016 interview, Kaepernick expanded upon his reasoning for taking a knee. Quote, "I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. To me, this is bigger than football, and it would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder." End quote. Kaepernick's protests set off a wave of commentary, critique, and support. And like so many other issues that emerge in the polarized political climate of contemporary America, taking a knee became a flashpoint that came to represent not only a single professional athlete's personal quest for social justice, but a divide inscribed into the political economy of America. But this brings us to a point that both sides of this issue equally missed. Those who saw the bravery of Kaepernick in his actions and the truth of his social critique, and those who saw kneeling during the national anthem as a direct affront and attack to America and its armed services. And what they missed was that the very idea of the social, whether it be in the form of a critique like social justice, or a positive project like a unified national consciousness, both are no longer even operative today. In other words, the struggle today is not only in the perennial fight for social justice vis-a-vis Colin Kaepernick. It is rather to come to the realization that social life and virtually all social relations themselves are now in the process of deteriorating, colonized by technology and the ubiquity of market forces. The social is in the process, to use the words of the postmodern French thinker Jean Baudrillard, of, quote, disappearing. For Baudrillard, what is a defining feature of postmodernity is not necessarily the lack of social justice, but the very lack of the social, the very breakdown of all social relations from the overdetermination of technological power and the rise of a simulated reality in its place. The very features that define our collective sociality and the meaning that was once generated from such connectivity are now in the process of a kind of foreclosure, leaving the real world behind and instead being transposed into the world of advertising, marketing, and virtual systems such as social media. The new structure of reality that we now exist in is precisely a reality that is, or can be, simulated. That is to say, paradoxically, if it cannot be simulated, if it cannot be recorded and uploaded into a system of other technological objects, then we don't even see it as being real. What we consider most real today is not our flesh and blood, our co-workers or neighbors, but rather the images, the duplications and reproductions of social reality. Today it is our Twitter feeds, the popular reality television show or the Netflix series. These are the emblematic examples of social reality in the 21st century, not what actually happens in our lived day-to-day experience. The aftermath of this technological mutation of social reality is profound. Friendship becomes quantified and virtualized on Facebook. Sex and dating become progressively colonized by the forces of technology. Our capacity to have empathy and compassion for the other becomes somewhat of a narcissistic spectacle in our social media feeds versus embodied solidarity. All of this points to not a lack of social justice, but something far more terrifying and dangerous: the very disappearance of our collective social life. This disappearance of the social, of course, is directly linked to the whole range of psychopathologies that now infect the globalized world. The loneliness, the depression, acute anxiety. All such pathologies reflect not simply dysfunctional brain chemistry, but a social texture on the verge of annihilation. To quote Baudrillard from an interview he gave before he died, quote, "It is the disappearance of things that fascinates us. And for me, the media is the place of disappearance. It is a place where meaning disappears, where significance, the message, the referent disappear. It is a way of making things circulate so quickly that they are made to disappear. And it fascinates us like a black hole. It is a place of disappearance. One is fascinated by the disappearance of things. And I think it's much the same today with politics, with the social. Today, I think it's a society where we are haunted and fascinated by the disappearance of the social, by the disappearance of the political. But it's a game, a big game. It can make a lot of things happen, but it's no longer the production of things which interests us. Production interests, but disappearance fascinates." End quote. And this is precisely why a company like Nike, a company that paradoxically has a horrific record when it comes to actual social justice, was able to so effortlessly capitalize on this event. Not on the substance or universal implications of Colin Kaepernick's critique, but rather on his image. How Kaepernick's virtual image could be inserted and related to other images and digital objects that now compose the global consumer system. In other words, what we saw with Colin Kaepernick was something like a simulation of social justice that obfuscated the very disappearance of our collective intersubjectivity. To quote Baudrillard again, "In this space where everything is meant to be seen on screens, we realize that there is nothing left to even see. It becomes a mirror of dullness, of nothingness, on which the disappearance of the other is blatantly reflected." Colin Kaepernick was of course right, and most certainly brave, for calling into question and dramatically bringing to the public's attention the question of social justice in the 21st century. And at the same time, some of Kaepernick's critics were also correct to point out the paradoxical fact of the incredible freedoms that are granted to American citizens in the form of free speech and public protest that afforded Kaepernick the very opportunity to make his social critique on the public level. But neither of these positions fully took into account the present structure of the global capitalist system, its relation to digital objects and media imagery, and the fact that this very system is in the process of rendering the very question of social justice obsolete. The true planetary crisis today is the fact that we humans have ceased, or are in the process of ceasing, to be the true reason for things. And instead, market dynamics, computational power, and all of the imagery that endlessly circulates in our global consumer space are beginning to have reasons all for their own.